Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Leanne Castellino. Our guest today is the Director of Education at Media Smarts, a national charitable organization in Canada. Media Smarts focuses on developing programs and resources for families, schools, and communities on digital and media literacy. Matthew Johnson is also a researcher, a thought leader in digital literacy, and a speaker. He's also a father of two teenagers. Matthew joins us today from Ottawa. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get started with Media Smart's latest offering. It's a resource guide for parents and families focused on TikTok. What was the genesis and the impetus for this sort of guide?
We have been working with TikTok for a couple of years now, as we work with a lot of the different apps and platforms that are popular with children and teens. And we had certainly found in our most recent research that TikTok had very quickly become one of the most popular platforms with teens in particular. We also knew that the youth in our research felt that it was important that the digital media literacy and online safety instruction that they got have the same aesthetic and ideally be presented in the same place as the platforms they were using. So all of that put together with the fact that TikTok was probably the platform that parents were least familiar with, because there are some kind of important ways that it's different from some of the older social networks or video apps, really pointed to the need for a specific resource for us to develop in partnership with TikTok that was going to educate parents and by extension teens about both how to get the most out of TikTok and ways to use it safely and ethically.
Can you take us through what that process looked like in terms of, you talked about a collaboration. So what was the kind of research that was undertaken to inform the guide?
We drew very heavily on our Young Canadians in a Wireless World research. This is a research program that we've been conducting since 2001. We believe it's the longest running research project on youth and digital technology anywhere in the world. And it gives us really essential insights about what kids are doing online, both in general and on specific platforms, their experiences, their attitudes, what they're learning in school, and their interactions with peers and parents. This is always our touchstone, but we also do research between the phases. So we've done 4 phases of Young Canadians in a Wireless World. We just finished releasing the reports from phase 4. But between phases, we also do additional, what we sometimes call deep dive research, where we identify a specific topic and focus on that. And so we did recently do a research report on how young people prefer to report mis and disinformation online. And as well, we drew on research that we had done a couple of years ago about how young people would prefer to give consent to privacy policies and terms of service when online. And this led, in fact, to a white paper that we delivered to a number of the different apps and platforms that we have connections to, with recommendations from the youth. And it was really heartening to us that one of those was taken up by TikTok, and that was the idea of creating a more secure, more managed experience for the youngest users. That is to say, users, in the case of TikTok, users aged 13 to 15. Because one of the things that the youth in that research told us was they don't feel like they're adults when they turn 18. There's a tremendous amount of growth and development that happens between 13 and 18. So they didn't feel it was appropriate that they suddenly have full unfettered access and have the exact same experience on an app that 18-year-old or older users do. So we did want to make sure that that was highlighted in the resource. We also wanted to make sure that we were communicating to parents particularly the ways in which TikTok is different from apps they may be more familiar with. So we wanted them to understand the ways in which youth use it that are different, that most of their video content, for instance, most of the videos they watch come not from people they're connected to, but rather from the For You page. So we needed to do some education around algorithmic recommendation, and that a lot of what happens on TikTok is collaborative, involving things like duets and stitches. So we wanted to educate around those. And beyond that, it was a matter of identifying in terms of the general digital media literacy topics, things like privacy, things like body image, things like advertising, things like screen time, which ones were the most relevant to TikTok, and how did we want to address those? What was the most essential information that we wanted to include in the guide on each of these topics, and which of our other resources could we link out to from the guide?
Certainly, that's a robust list of different items that informed this guide. And parsing through that must have presented some interesting challenges. So how did you arrive at the structure of the guide in terms of what can parents expect when they access this guide?
So the guide starts with a brief description of what TikTok is, and in particular, as I say, the ways in which it's different. TikTok, in fact, they don't refer to it as a social network. They refer to it as a short form video app. And of course, we think of it as a social network. It has many social networking features. And certainly it is possible to contact other people, but because the focus is on making, editing, and collaborating on videos, it was important to us to make sure that was clear. And we also have a glossary, which is at the end of the guide, but we color code all of the words that are in the glossary as green, so that anytime you're looking at one of the other sections of the guide and you see something that's green, you know that it's in the glossary, so you can check there. Beyond that, we have a section talking about communication, because of course that is the most important thing that we as parents can do, is to have an open and ongoing conversation with our teens and kids about all of the media that they use and consume. So we have tips for conversations to have before kids start using any social network, before teens start using TikTok, talking about those other resources that are available to them, talking about things that they can do to limit who can see their content, to limit who can connect or interact with them, to limit what people can do with their content as well. We have some tips about what we call co-viewing, which of course sometimes means actually using an app or watching or playing something together, but also means just having that ongoing conversation with youth about their media lives, about what they're doing, about what they're consuming, about what they're making, and encouraging mindful use, so that we're using it not just whenever we have a moment when we're bored, which of course is a particular risk when we're talking about an app that delivers short form videos, that it's going to be that app that we use in those interstitial moments, and those moments when we just have nothing else to do, which is not always a bad thing. I'm not going to say that you're necessarily better off staring into space if you're waiting in line or something like that, but it is important that it's a choice that we make, that it's not something that we do entirely out of habit. Go on.
I was just going to say, I want to pick up on one point that you just brought up.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you can answer this, but maybe some of your research has yielded, some light on it. And that's the communication piece between parent and child as it relates to social media and devices. Do you feel like the message is getting out there in general because of, all kinds of media coverage, most of it obviously negative, loss of life in many cases, countries around the world that have banned different social media apps. Do you feel that in Canada, that the education piece as it relates to families having these conversations amongst themselves is happening?
Well, obviously, we're working hard to make sure that it's happening. But it is unfortunate, I think, that there remains a bit too much of an emphasis on the idea of time as being the most important thing. And also unfortunate that people do fall into the addiction framing, and not just adults, because in my experience, teens themselves very easily fall into that framing that they see themselves as being addicted. And we know, first of all, that time by itself, the amount of time we spend using a device or a particular platform, isn't that meaningful by itself. There's a tremendous amount of data that shows that what's more important is when you're using it. So we know, for instance, that time has a greater impact for teens on weekdays than weekends. How you're using it, whether you are using it in an active way, whether you're using it for genuine socialization, for creative purposes, to be educational, or whether you're using it in a reflexive way. We know that different kinds of activities and content affect different people differently, and that can be mediated by media literacy education. And we even know that how we view our relationship with these apps and devices has an impact. That if we see our relationship as one of addiction, we actually are likely to have a worse experience. Whereas if we see our relationship as being one of habit, as being something that we have control over if we choose to take control, then people typically have a better experience. And we're getting a guest appearance from my cat here. And so it's important to us, and we don't want to paper over the fact that, in general, a lot of online platforms are designed to get us to keep using them. They have features that make us come back to them. They have features that try to get us to use them at least once a day in many cases, because that's something that is reported to shareholders, daily active usage. And so, these are things that we need to make parents and young people aware of. But we're not powerless in the face of those things. In the same way, Doritos have been engineered. They've spent millions of dollars to engineer Doritos to be as tasty as possible and to get us to eat as much of the bag at a sitting as possible. But that doesn't mean we're powerless to eat them or not. And it doesn't mean that it's not possible to just have a certain amount. We just have to build better habits.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about awareness, I wonder, Matthew, if there are any quick insights or statistics that you can share about TikTok in particular that parents might be surprised to learn.
I think parents might be surprised to learn that it was the second most popular app in our most recent survey. And I think that why they might be surprised is, in my experience, it changes a lot with age, and that parents may not be as aware that their kids are spending time, that their teens are spending time on TikTok, because they don't use it to connect with friends. So we know that a lot of the reasons why, for instance, young people will often want to have a phone in the bedroom is both because they don't want to miss updates from their friends, but also because they want to be available to their friends. They want to make sure if their friends need them, or just if their friends post something at 2 a.m, they're there to support them. And we don't typically see that kind of thing with TikTok, simply because it's not as social. They're not interacting with close friends to the same degree. And because of that, parents may not necessarily be aware of that their teens are using TikTok, or how much their teens are using TikTok. But we do know that it's extremely popular among teens and in some cases younger kids as well, though for the reasons I said earlier, kids under 13 shouldn't be using TikTok with their own account. We do recommend if kids under 13 really, really, really want to use TikTok, we recommend that parents create an account that they can then use together with their kids and then move to the 13 to 15-year-old experience so that they can have that kind of graduated independence.
You also mentioned that this guide that MediaSmarts put together was done in collaboration with TikTok, which may catch a few people off guard. You know, it's a surprising little piece of information. Can you take us through, Matthew, what that collaboration looked like and how did it help yield the information that's in the guide?
Well, in this case, it was pretty straightforward. We developed a draft at MediaSmarts. And we received feedback from TikTok on the draft. We particularly when it related to specific features of TikTok or particular language that they wanted to use. They let us know about some of the technical features that we didn't know as much about. And then we did the final draft, which was then laid out and published. So it was a pretty simple collaboration where the content, really the bulk of the content aimed at parents, the bulk of the content about essentially how to have a good experience with TikTok and how to talk to your kids about TikTok was drafted by us, and some of the content specifically about how the platform works was either drafted by or was consulted on by TikTok.
Was there anything in that information exchange that caught your eye, that surprised you, that you may not have known about TikTok and some of its safety features?
I'm not sure there was necessarily anything that surprised me. I hadn't really had an opportunity before to look closely at TikTok's community guidelines. And that's something that, again, the young people in our research said was really important, particularly when it came to pushing back against online hate and cyberbullying. They felt very strongly that platforms needed to do more to communicate their guidelines. So that was something that I hadn't had a chance to look at. And I thought it was really important to put front and center that TikTok has among its community guidelines the idea, for instance, of championing inclusion, of fostering civility, and protecting privacy, so that a lot of the content that we have in there is tied around that, about respecting people's privacy and making it possible for everyone to be included.
On the issue of privacy, what can you tell us? Because a lot of people worry about the data that is mined from these social media apps and video sharing apps. What do we need to know about as parents with respect to the data that is being mined?
So each platform, of course, every one of these social media apps and video apps collect information. And because in almost every case, the bulk of their revenue comes from advertising, and targeted advertising is what they offer that traditional media doesn't. And that's on by default, but more and more platforms, including TikTok, are giving people options of turning that off to one degree or another. So you do have the option to turn off personalized ads. And this information is in the guide, where you can go into the settings and turn targeted ads on or off, depending on whether or not you want to see ads that are based on what information TikTok has about you. But we also have information on ways that you can limit what data TikTok itself collects. So we include a link to the privacy policy, which outlines how TikTok collects and uses data. And the guide actually gives instructions on how to adjust privacy settings on your device. So on an iPhone or an iPad, for instance, you can actually turn off tracking on the device for each of your different apps. That's not possible at the moment on an Android device, but there is an app called DuckDuckGo, which is free and has a feature called App Tracking Protection that will prevent other apps on the phone from collecting data. And all of that information is in the guide so that if parents are uncomfortable with data being collected on their device or their children's device, they can turn it off at the source.
Along those same lines, when we talk about parental controls on some of these apps, how easy or difficult is it to circumvent a parental control that may be applied to TikTok?
So TikTok has a feature that allows parents if the user is within a certain age range, it allows parents to control the settings. It doesn't necessarily allow you to see what's being posted. And in general, we don't encourage parents to spy on their kids. But it does allow you to turn restricted mode on and off, to change the privacy settings and things like that. That's called family pairing. And really the only way, if you're using that, the only way to get around it is to create a whole other account. But that's something, of course, that is always possible. And again, that's one of the reasons why we encourage conversation and household rules over direct surveillance, because it's always possible for kids to make another account. And it's always possible for them to find some way around surveillance or direct control. And of course, if they're focused on not being spied on, then they're not likely to come to you if they have a problem.
So it's safe to say, Matthew, that social media giants continue to receive a lot of media scrutiny, a lot of negative coverage in the United States. TikTok, for example, is on the verge of potentially being banned in that country, currently being used by over 170 million people. Based on what you've just described, do you believe a ban like that is reasonable?
I can't really take a position on that. We're an education nonprofit, so it's outside of our mandate to weigh in on policy measures like that.
I understand. So let me switch gears a little bit and ask you about digital citizenship, because I think it is obviously related to the other question. We've heard the term a lot, especially as parents, in recent years in particular. First of all, how do you define digital citizenship?
So digital citizenship is about being an engaged citizen in your online communities, and it's about using online tools to be an engaged citizen in the rest of your life. It's really important to us that digital citizenship is not just about your responsibilities, and it's not just about keeping yourself safe. It is about being a full citizen in the online world. And that's one of the reasons why we think it's really important that that everybody, but particularly young people, understand the power that they have when they're interacting with these platforms, that we have power as users of the platforms. We do have power as citizens, that we can, as citizens, take a stand and influence our lawmakers and policymakers based on what we think is the right policy. And we have power as consumers as well. So going back to the fact that all of these platforms make their money from advertising, that gives us a tremendous amount of leverage in terms of changing practices that we may see as unfair, because we can go through the advertisers and we can make them understand when we're unhappy with a platform, and that has a direct impact on how the platform does business. And there have been a number of cases where platforms, very large ones in some cases, have changed how they do business based on advertiser pressure, which is to say consumer pressure.
Now, Matthew, you are a father of two teenage boys, 15 and 13 years old, certainly in the heart of the demographic that this guide that Media Smarts has put together is trying to target. With all the knowledge and expertise you have in the digital media literacy space, how do you manage this in your own home? Is it a blessing or a curse that you know so much about this? And sort of what does that look like?
Well, I guess it's a bit of a curse in that I think I feel guilty more often than other people, particularly when I'm doing interviews or other things, when I'm using a screen, when at times when my kids aren't supposed to be using screens. But no, I would say that in general it is a blessing because in some ways I worry less. And I feel more confident, I think, certainly than I did even a few years ago before we had knew as much, before the research base had built up as much about what is the best approach to things like screen time, and what experiences to foster. And that has been a big change for me a few years ago, in terms of both establishing, rather than counting minutes, establishing routines, establishing times and places where screen use is allowed and times and places where it's not allowed. Coming to an understanding of the importance of my role as a model in terms of healthy screen use, and also thinking of it in terms of providing more time for the activities that I think are valuable for, so when one of my sons is learning something, or when they're making something, or when they're outside playing Pokemon Go, or when they're playing Ring Fit or something else that gets them moving, or when they're playing a video game together with one another or together with a friend, I know that all of those things are more positive activities, and I don't feel bad about giving time to that, but I also make sure, of course, to reserve time for us to spend together as a family without screens.
What is the ideal age for a parent to sit down with their child and maybe consider looking at Talking TikTok, a family guide, the guide that we're talking about today?
It really depends on the child. So really, as I said earlier, young people shouldn't be using TikTok before they're 13, partly because, quite simply, it's against the terms of service, but also because there is that managed experience. If you lie about your age to join, if you say that you're 30 or 40 or 50, then you're not going to get that managed experience. So we do recommend that if we set up the parent account, if kids are younger than 13. So I would say, in general, if it's a child who's setting up their own first account at age 13, then that's the time to do it. If you're looking at creating your own account that you're going to share with your child a couple of years earlier, then that's the time to do it. But really what's most important, of course, is that ideally you do it before kids start using TikTok. But at the same time, if they're already using it, I think there are things that pretty much any parent can learn from this guide. And most importantly, there are ways to start a conversation that maybe you haven't started yet, because that's what's most important, more than any facts, more than any features. It is getting that conversation going.
Matthew Johnson, Director of Education at Media Smarts, thank you so much for your time and your insight today.
Thank you.